Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Many fans are convinced they know Hagrid well, the kind-hearted gamekeeper whom Harry, Ron, and Hermione visited countless times. But if you dig deeper, you'll discover surprising facts hidden behind his familiar image. You probably know his pink umbrella, his boundless love for magical creatures, and his gift for seeing the best in people. Yet the Keeper of Keys at Hogwarts has far more secrets than meets the eye. Today we'll uncover little-known details that might astonish you. Enjoy watching. Number 1. J.K. Rowling's plans. Few people realize that Hagrid's fate could have been far more dramatic. In an interview with Daniel Radcliffe included in the Blu-ray version of the final film, Rowling confessed she had always planned for Hagrid to carry Harry's body out of the Forbidden Forest. It was meant as powerful symbolism. Hagrid brought baby Harry at the very beginning of the story, and so it should end with him as well. Moreover, this idea became a kind of plot armor, since Rowling had considered killing off the half-giant earlier in the series. Number 2. He was a Gryffindor. Many assumed that by temperament Hagrid might belong in Hufflepuff, hard-working, humble, and genuine. But fate had other plans. When placed before the Sorting Hat, it declared him a Gryffindor. This explains much: his reckless courage, his loyalty to friends, and his willingness to risk everything for others. Despite his simple nature, Hagrid truly had the heart of a lion. Number 3. He was in the First Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore trusted Hagrid more than many other wizards. That's why he gave him the most important missions, from secret errands at Gringotts to rescuing baby Harry the night his parents died. It's no surprise that Hagrid was part of the First Order of the Phoenix, where Dumbledore's most devoted allies fought. In the film Order of the Phoenix, he can even be seen in an old photograph of the group. Number 4. The character was based on a real biker. Hagrid actually had a real-life prototype. J.K. Rowling once met a biker whose imposing frame contrasted sharply with his gentle hobby. He passionately talked about the flowers in his garden. That contradiction became the foundation of Hagrid's character, a fearsome figure hiding a soft, kind heart. Robbie Coltrane, who played Hagrid, spoke about this in the book Harry Potter, Page to Screen. Number 5. A 16-inch flexible wand. As a half-giant, Hagrid possessed not only immense strength, but also a special bond with nature. His oak wand measured 16 inches and was notably flexible. According to Mr. Ollivander, oak suits those drawn to the natural world's magic. This fit Hagrid perfectly. Sadly, after his expulsion from Hogwarts, the wand was broken. But as we know, it continued to serve him in another form, hidden inside his pink umbrella. Number 6. Hagrid was allergic to cats. A surprising fact: Hagrid, who adored magical creatures of all kinds, couldn't get along with ordinary cats. The reason was simple: he was allergic to them. In Philosopher's Stone, he admits to Harry that cats make him sneeze. That's why he bought him Hedwig, the snowy owl. Later, Rowling confirmed it. Fluffy felines were the one animal Hagrid avoided. Number 7. He couldn't produce a Patronus, mighty, kind, loyal, but not all-powerful. Rowling once revealed that Hagrid was never able to cast a Patronus. The reason is clear: the spell requires immense skill, and he never got the chance to master it at school. Even among highly trained wizards, producing a Patronus is rare, so it was no shame for Hagrid not to manage it. His strengths lay elsewhere. Number 8. His name has biblical and dialect roots. The name Rubeus carries weight. From the Latin rubeus, meaning red, it ties Hagrid to the earth and to raw passion. Rowling often used names as symbols, and for Hagrid this choice fits. He is rooted in nature, loyal to the soil of the Forbidden Forest, and ruled by his emotions rather than calculation. His fiery defense of Harry in Philosopher's Stone, "Never insult Albus Dumbledore in front of me," echoes that red intensity, a man whose heart blazes before his mind catches up. The surname Hagrid adds a darker note. In Old English dialects, it means the discomfort of sleepless nights or the misery of a hangover. Rowling once explained that she wanted a name that suggested both strength and hardship. Hagrid's fondness for a glass of fire whiskey after disappointments and his mournful tone when Buckbeak was sentenced to death in Prisoner of Azkaban reflect that meaning. His very name becomes a mirror, half rooted in power, half weighed down by sorrow. Number 9, he almost got married. Hagrid's romance with Madame Olympe Maxime began with awkward charm during the Triwizard Tournament in Goblet of Fire. Readers watched the usually clumsy half-giant straighten his moleskin coat, nervously offering his arm to the elegant headmistress of Beauxbatons. At the Yule Ball, the sight of the two giants waltzing together under the enchanted ceiling was both comic and touching. For once, Hagrid was not just the gentle gamekeeper, he was a man in love. But their relationship soon revealed a painful divide. When Rita Skeeter's article exposed Hagrid's giant heritage, he openly admitted it, saying, "I am what I am, and I'm not ashamed." Maxime, however, reacted with fury, denying that she had giant blood at all. Hagrid's pride clashed with her denial, and the silence between them grew. The honesty that defined him became the very thing that pushed her away. It showed a rare vulnerability in Hagrid, who had always been stronger in heart than in words. Even so, Rowling suggested that the affection never fully died. Maxime later accompanied Hagrid on a mission to parley with the giants, proving that she still trusted and respected him. Their story never reached the wedding altar, but it revealed a new side of Hagrid. Not just the loyal friend or protector of beasts, but a man who longed for companionship. In his brief love story, readers saw how deeply he could feel, and how easily his open heart could be wounded. Number 10. He had a giant half-brother. Hagrid's bond with his half-brother Grawp was one of the most touching and overlooked parts of his story. In Order of the Phoenix, he brings Harry, Ron, and Hermione deep into the Forbidden Forest to reveal the secret he had been keeping. Towering above the trees stood Grawp, a giant far smaller than most of his kind, but still massive compared to Hagrid. "Grawpy, this is Harry, and this is Hermione, and this is Ron," Hagrid said proudly, as though introducing family at the dinner table. The scene was frightening for the trio, but for Hagrid, it was an act of love. Many wizards saw only danger in Grawp. He was rough, impatient, and could easily crush anyone in a fit of temper. But Hagrid refused to give up. He believed his brother could learn gentleness if only given the chance. He tried to teach him words, even insisting Grawp practice saying "Hermy" when Hermione nervously approached. To Hagrid, this was not hopeless. It was proof that even giants, feared and hunted by the wizarding world, could be reached with patience. That belief paid off in the Battle of Hogwarts. When Death Eaters stormed the castle, Grawp fought alongside the defenders, hurling enemies aside with his strength. It was chaotic and brutal, but it was also redemption. Hagrid's stubborn faith in his brother had not been wasted. Rowling showed through this bond that Hagrid's loyalty was not selective. He loved fiercely even when it cost him, even when the world told him it was impossible. Number 11, his heart belonged to dragons. Hagrid's fascination with magical creatures found its purest form in dragons. In Philosopher's Stone, he could hardly contain his excitement when he whispered to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, "I shouldn't have told you that I've got Norbert." The tiny Norwegian ridgeback egg, won in a card game with a cloaked stranger, became the center of his world. He stayed up at night, reading by firelight, gently rocking the egg in the flames until it hatched. For Hagrid, it wasn't danger he saw, it was wonder. The hatching scene revealed the depth of his devotion. "Bless him, look, he knows his mummy!" Hagrid exclaimed, holding the biting hatchling as though it were a newborn child. Harry and his friends saw sharp fangs and scales, but Hagrid saw beauty. Even when Norbert snapped and spat sparks, Hagrid remained patient. His dream had always been to raise a dragon, a dream so reckless and yet so tender it highlighted the core of his character. When the truth came out that Norbert was really Norberta, Hagrid's joy never dimmed. He spoke of her with pride, delighted that she grew strong in the Romanian dragon sanctuary under the care of Charlie Weasley. He never stopped imagining what it would have been like to keep her. To others, the idea of living with a dragon was madness. For Hagrid, it was paradise denied. Rowling later explained that the dragon subplot was not accidental. It was meant to show that Hagrid loved even the most dangerous and unpredictable creatures, and that his compassion extended beyond reason. In many ways, Norberta was the symbol of Hagrid's heart, untamable, fiery, and misunderstood. Where others saw a monster, he saw a child to be loved, and that was the essence of Hagrid. Number 12. His life could have been completely different. Hagrid's story could have been written very differently. If he had never been expelled in his 3rd year, his path might have led him to a classroom of his own. His passion for magical creatures was unmatched, and even as a boy he showed a gift for understanding beings that others called dangerous. Imagine him as a professor of care of magical creatures decades earlier, his lessons shaping generations of witches and wizards. Minerva McGonagall herself admitted in Chamber of Secrets that Hagrid is incapable of murder, showing that his heart and talent were clear even in his youth. Instead, the expulsion closed every door. His wand was snapped, and with it, any dream of completing his magical education. He became the gamekeeper, tending to the forest and the beasts. Yet this punishment never erased his knowledge. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione needed answers, they often turned to Hagrid first. His lessons in the forest were no less important than those given in the castle. It is telling that years later he was finally offered the teaching post for care of magical creatures, as if the school itself recognized the teacher he was always meant to be. Rowling noted in interviews that this injustice defined him. Rather than make Hagrid bitter, it forged his kindness. His sympathy always leaned toward the weak, the broken, the misunderstood. From the hippogriff Buckbeak to the outcast giant Grawp, Hagrid saw value where others only saw danger. "I don't care what they think, I know what's right," he once told Harry, refusing to abandon the creatures he loved. That attitude, born of his own rejection, became his greatest strength. There is tragedy in this fate, but also greatness. He might have been a scholar or a celebrated magizoologist, respected in wizarding circles. Instead, he was the man with muddy boots, living in a hut on the edge of the forest. And yet because of that he became the protector of Harry and his friends, the guardian of Hogwarts secrets, and a reminder that worth is not measured by titles. His life could have been grander, yes, but it was his quiet, humble path that made him unforgettable. Number 13. He always considered Dumbledore his saviour. For Hagrid, Albus Dumbledore was not just a headmaster. He was the man who saved his life. When Hagrid was accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets and expelled from Hogwarts, his world nearly ended. His wand was broken, his name stained. Most teachers believed the half-giant boy guilty, but Dumbledore did not. Instead of casting him out, he gave Hagrid a place on the grounds, first as a gamekeeper, later as keeper of keys and grounds. Without that mercy, Hagrid would have been lost in a world that feared his bloodline. The memory of that act shaped everything that followed. In Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid's loyalty spills out in a single line. If anyone wanted to find out stuff, all they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders. That'd lead 'em right. That's all I'm saying. Even under suspicion again, Hagrid trusted Dumbledore completely. When Cornelius Fudge tried to take him to Azkaban, Hagrid shouted one last message to the trio. "Follow the spiders, and don't touch nothing in the castle without Dumbledore's say-so." His faith in the headmaster never cracked, not even when his own freedom was at stake. This bond went deeper than duty. Rowling herself explained in interviews that Dumbledore became a father figure for Hagrid, The half-giant had lost his parents early, his giantess mother abandoned him, and his human father died when he was still young. Dumbledore filled that void. When the headmaster gave Hagrid dangerous missions, like retrieving the Philosopher's Stone from Gringotts or escorting Harry safely out of Privet Drive, Hagrid accepted without hesitation. He didn't weigh the risks. He obeyed because it was Dumbledore asking. The pattern runs through the entire series. After Dumbledore's death in Half-Blood Prince, Hagrid is shattered. He builds the funeral pyre himself, hands raw from the work, face streaked with tears. The grief in those pages is not just for a leader, but for the man who gave him dignity and belonging. To understand Hagrid is to understand this. His life was divided into two parts, before Dumbledore and after Dumbledore. Everything he did was a repayment of a debt that could never truly be repaid. Number 14. His name appeared before his first entrance. When readers first meet Rubeus Hagrid in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he is a giant of a man riding a flying motorbike, carrying baby Harry in his arms. It feels like an introduction that bursts into the story with power and warmth. But if we look more closely, Hagrid's presence enters the book earlier than that dramatic arrival. His name appears before he even steps onto the page, hidden in a small but meaningful exchange. On the very first chapter, The Boy Who Lived, Professor McGonagall and Albus Dumbledore stand on Privet Drive discussing the fate of baby Harry. McGonagall, still uncertain about leaving the boy with the Dursleys, questions the plan. Dumbledore reassures her by mentioning who will bring Harry. He says, "Hagrid's bringing him." In that single moment, Hagrid is already connected to Harry's destiny. He is trusted with the most important task in the wizarding world, delivering the child who would one day defeat Voldemort. This mention is not casual. It works like a seed planted in the reader's mind. By naming Hagrid before he arrives, Rowling builds anticipation. We know someone unusual is coming, someone trusted by Dumbledore himself. So when the roar of the flying motorbike finally breaks the silence, the reader already feels prepared. The name and the expectation give the scene more weight. Hagrid does not arrive as a stranger. He arrives as someone whose importance has already been declared. It is a clever piece of storytelling. Rowling ties Hagrid to Harry's journey from the very first page, even before the boy himself grows up to meet him. This early foreshadowing makes Hagrid's role feel inevitable, almost fated. He is not just a friend Harry meets later at Hogwarts. He is the very first figure of the magical world to enter Harry's life, and his name lingers in the air before his towering shadow even appears. Number 15, he often hid his true strength. Hagrid's physical power is one of those elements in the Harry Potter universe that remains mostly in the background, hinted at rather than emphasized. Readers meet him first in Philosopher's Stone when he bursts into the hut on the rock to deliver Harry's letter, and it is here we catch the first glimpse of that overwhelming strength. Rowling notes that he bends the gun of Vernon Dursley into a knot as easily as if it had been made of rubber. That scene, often read as comic, reveals a level of raw power that should not be underestimated. It is not simply that Hagrid is tall or broad. His half-giant heritage makes him capable of feats of force, well beyond what an ordinary wizard or muggle could ever hope to accomplish. Yet the important detail is that such moments are rare. Hagrid's power is present in almost every interaction, but he rarely chooses to display it. As the story unfolds, readers often forget that Hagrid's size and strength could have made him a figure of intimidation within Hogwarts. Instead, his gentle demeanor and tendency to speak in a friendly, almost childlike manner soften his appearance. He holds back intentionally because he knows how easy it would be for others to fear him. One need only remember his role in escorting Harry through Diagon Alley. He lifts the boy as if he weighed nothing at all, navigates through bustling crowds, and even drags a reluctant owl cage without breaking a sweat. For Harry, still frail and malnourished from life with the Dursleys, this display of quiet strength must have seemed both reassuring and overwhelming. But Rowling keeps the focus on Hagrid's kindness rather than his force, teaching us that power can be masked by gentleness. The events in Chamber of Secrets offer another subtle reminder of Hagrid's might. When the Ministry of Magic sends Cornelius Fudge and Lucius Malfoy to arrest him under suspicion of opening the chamber, Hagrid makes no attempt to resist, though he easily could have. He is escorted to Azkaban without a fight, though the description of his size compared to the officials shows us the unspoken truth. If he had chosen to push back, the outcome would have been very different. Rowling places in that scene an intentional contrast between authority and physical dominance. Hagrid could have overpowered Fudge and Malfoy, but he chooses submission, partly out of respect for the institution of the Ministry, and partly because he knows that unleashing his strength would confirm the very fears people hold about him. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Hagrid's control is once again put to the test during the execution of Buckbeak. His enormous hands tremble as he pours tea for Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and he clutches Fang for comfort. Later, when they visit him before the scheduled execution, he collapses emotionally, his sobs shaking the hut. Yet the most striking detail is that the children feel the full weight of his grief as a physical presence. When Hagrid embraces them, he nearly crushes them. The narrative tells us that Harry felt his ribs creak in Hagrid's grip. What is fascinating here is that even in despair, Hagrid forgets for a moment to restrain himself, and Rowling gives us a fleeting glimpse of what his full, untempered strength can feel like for those around him. A powerful moment arrives in Goblet of Fire when Hagrid reveals his half-giant heritage to Madame Maxime. Their conversation unfolds near the edge of the Forbidden Forest, and while his words are filled with shame, the narrative underlines how his power is bound up in his identity. Giants in Rowling's world are described as brutal, destructive, and feared even by dark wizards. Hagrid's refusal to embrace that part of himself is deliberate. He prefers to live as a caretaker of magical creatures, a protector of students, a friend. This conscious suppression of power is not weakness, it is restraint. His decision to present himself as a gentle giant is not only about how others see him, but also about how he chooses to define himself. One of the most memorable demonstrations of Hagrid's strength comes in Order of the Phoenix, when he is attacked by Ministry officials attempting to remove him from Hogwarts. Rowling describes how Hagrid took 4 stunning spells straight to the chest and hardly seemed to notice them. Wizards who could incapacitate ordinary men and witches with ease find themselves unable to subdue him. In that moment, the half-giant side of Hagrid is undeniable. He throws the officials off as if they were children and resists until he decides it is better to retreat. This scene does not simply display his power, it demonstrates his awareness of its consequences. Had he chosen to fully retaliate, the Ministry might have suffered casualties, and Hagrid knows that this would turn public opinion against Dumbledore's cause. Once again, he chooses restraint over domination. Equally telling is the way Hagrid deals with dangerous magical creatures. In Philosopher's Stone, he wins Norbert the dragon hatchling from a stranger in a pub, and later manages to keep the growing creature in his wooden hut without apparent fear. His handling of the dragon, and later of creatures such as the hippogriffs, acromantulas, and thestrals, shows a relationship between his strength and his empathy. While most people would panic at the sight of Aragog, Hagrid treats the giant spider with respect, and Aragog responds in kind. It is not only knowledge of creatures that protects Hagrid, it is his physical ability to withstand and control them, if necessary. Yet Rowling makes it clear that he never abuses this strength. His bond with the creatures is always rooted in care. Number 16, he was almost killed in the 6th book. Under the shadow of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid always stood as a giant who seemed indestructible, yet few readers realize how close J.K. Rowling came to taking him from the story altogether. During the planning of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Rowling drafted outlines in which Hagrid's death would have marked the turning point of the war. She considered showing his body fall beneath the collapse of his hut after a Death Eater attack, his massive frame sprawled like a fallen oak, a shocking symbol that the protective shield of Hogwarts had been shattered. The idea was brutal, deliberate, and meant to emphasize that Voldemort's return brought not only danger to students, but irreversible losses among the most beloved figures of the series. In Rowling's notes, this possibility was never frivolous. She had already shown the willingness to kill important mentors, such as Albus Dumbledore, and her reasoning was consistent. If the battle against Voldemort was to feel real, then readers needed to see figures of safety stripped away. In early drafts, Hagrid's hut was to be consumed by fiend fire conjured by Death Eaters, with the flames described as licking the night sky like the tongues of demons. Hagrid would perish in the attempt to shield Fang, his loyal boarhound, and some students who had sought refuge in his cottage. It would have been a scene designed to devastate both Harry and the audience, a reminder that kindness offered no immunity against cruelty. Yet as the drafts evolved, Rowling hesitated. She recognized that Hagrid carried more than brute strength. He embodied continuity from the very first chapter of Philosopher's Stone. He was the one who delivered Harry to the Dursleys' doorstep, the first character to guide the boy into the magical world, and the one who so often reminded readers of the warmth beneath the darker narrative. To kill him would not simply be to underline the danger, it would erase the thread of constancy Rowling wanted to maintain as the story grew bloodier. When Harry walks into the forest in Deathly Hallows, Rowling decided that Hagrid had to be there. It was Hagrid who carried him out, seemingly lifeless, his arms cradling the boy who had once been delivered in swaddling blankets to Privet Drive. The symmetry was too powerful to ignore. Rowling herself later remarked in interviews that she wanted Hagrid alive for that precise moment, because the visual of the giant carrying Harry in his arms while Voldemort proclaimed victory provided a harrowing echo of parental loss and hope. This moment would have lost its impact had Hagrid been erased earlier. Consider the detail of Hagrid's capture during the Battle of the Astronomy Tower in Half-Blood Prince. The Death Eaters set his hut ablaze, and he fights to extinguish the flames while Fang howls in terror. The destruction of his home was not accidental. It was a remnant of the original Death Draft, toned down yet still carrying the echo of Rowling's earlier intent. She transferred the symbolic act of loss to his dwelling rather than to his life. Readers were left shaken but reassured that Hagrid himself endured, a living symbol of endurance amidst destruction. Rowling's creative hesitation reveals her complex relationship with Hagrid. On the one hand, he was always an outsider, a half-giant scorned by wizards, dismissed by the Ministry, even temporarily expelled from Hogwarts. On the other hand, his loyalty never faltered. He stood beside Harry when others doubted him, from the Triwizard Tournament controversy to the smear campaigns in the Daily Prophet. Killing him would have been narratively consistent with the cruelty of war, but Rowling ultimately chose the path of mercy, allowing kindness itself to endure when logic suggested it should perish. The presence of Hagrid at key emotional beats reinforces this design. In Goblet of Fire, he comforts Harry after the brutal first task, reminding him that survival alone was an achievement. In Order of the Phoenix, despite his own injuries from a mission with the Giants, he insists on teaching care of magical creatures and protecting Harry from Umbridge's tyranny. His persistence embodies resilience. Thus, when Rowling envisioned the chaos of the war's climax, she recognized the necessity of preserving at least one character who carried unshakable loyalty from beginning to end. One can imagine the alternative. If Hagrid had died in Half-Blood Prince, the burden of Dumbledore's death would have doubled in impact, but perhaps to the point of overkill. Harry's grief would have been too heavy, his support too diminished. Without Hagrid, Harry's return from the forest in Deathly Hallows would have lacked the visual parallel of the boy carried by the giant protector. The imagery of resurrection, of Harry standing alive after being born as a corpse, depends on Hagrid's survival. It transforms Hagrid into a vessel of symbolic storytelling rather than just a beloved character. Rowling herself once explained that she preserved Hagrid so that readers had something steady to cling to as the story darkened. His survival was intentional, not accidental, and his character became the constant heartbeat of Hogwarts. While professors died, friends were lost, and even Harry's certainty wavered, Hagrid remained unchanged. He loved magical creatures others feared, welcomed outsiders others scorned, and extended friendship when the world turned hostile. By leaving him alive, Rowling emphasized that compassion can survive even in the bloodiest of wars. The text of the novels reflects this balance. In Half-Blood Prince, when Death Eaters set fire to his home, Rowling writes, Hagrid's massive frame was silhouetted against the flames, beating at them with his jacket. It is almost as though the author shows us a rehearsal of his possible end, allowing readers to glimpse what might have been, only to spare him at the last moment. This narrative sleight of hand heightens the tension without extinguishing the character. It reminds readers that survival is never guaranteed, making his continued presence all the more valuable. Number 17. He once had a Patronus in early drafts. Of all the secrets hidden within J.K. Rowling's early drafts, one of the most fascinating is the quiet note that at one point she considered giving Rubeus Hagrid his own Patronus. In the final published books, it is made clear that Hagrid never conjures one, and indeed Rowling herself explained later that a full corporeal Patronus was beyond his magical ability. Yet in her early sketches of the wizarding world, she had toyed with the idea of what such a Patronus might be, and among the possibilities she mentioned were a massive bear or a great dog. This fragment of information may seem small, but it reveals a world of what-ifs about one of the most beloved characters in the Harry Potter series. The image of Hagrid producing a shining silver beast from the end of his pink umbrella wand immediately sparks curiosity. Hagrid is often portrayed as clumsy, his magic somewhat unreliable because he never completed his schooling after being expelled in his 3rd year. When Harry first sees him attempt a spell, it is to give Dudley Dursley a pig's tail in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Rowling writes, he swung it mightily at Dudley's backside, and there was a flash of violet light, a sound like a firecracker, a sharp squeal, and next second Dudley was dancing with a pig's tail sticking out of his trousers. This moment illustrates Hagrid's raw power, but also his lack of precision. If even this simple transfiguration resulted in a partial success, the idea of him conjuring the intricate magic of a Patronus feels unlikely. Yet, had Rowling allowed it, it would have been one of the most extraordinary images in the entire saga. To understand why Rowling abandoned the idea, it is helpful to revisit what the Patronus charm represents. As Remus Lupin explains to Harry in Prisoner of Azkaban, the Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. It requires not only magical skill but also immense mental concentration and emotional strength. Hagrid, though brimming with loyalty, courage and compassion, often doubts himself and carries scars from his past, his expulsion, the suspicion cast upon him during the Chamber of Secrets incident, and his isolation as a half-giant. Perhaps Rowling felt that Hagrid's limitations in formal magic were a necessary balance to his towering physical and emotional presence. Still, one cannot help but imagine what animal form his Patronus would have taken had Rowling kept the idea. The suggestion of a bear seems fitting. Bears are symbols of protection, strength, and guardianship, qualities that Hagrid displays repeatedly throughout the series. He shields Harry, Ron, and Hermione during their first encounter with Draco Malfoy in the Forbidden Forest. He insists on bringing Harry into the wizarding world personally, telling the boy, "You're a wizard, Harry." A Patronus in the shape of a massive bear, lumbering yet unyielding. would embody his instinct to nurture and defend, even at risk to himself. Another possibility Rowling considered was a large dog. This too makes sense, as dogs represent loyalty and companionship. Hagrid is almost inseparable from his boarhound Fang, who is described in Chamber of Secrets as a great, lumbering boarhound, slobbering and affectionate, though cowardly at heart. The bond between Hagrid and Fang is a mirror of his deeper character. He loves without condition, forgives easily, and stands by his friends no matter what. If Hagrid's Patronus had manifested as a great silver dog, it would not only reflect Fang, but also Hagrid's dog-like devotion to Dumbledore, the man he reveres as both protector and guide. Fans have often compared Hagrid's potential Patronus with that of other characters to consider what it might reveal about him. Harry's stag symbolizes his father's animagus form, a majestic animal that leads and protects. Hermione's otter suggests intelligence, playfulness, and resilience. Even Severus Snape's doe, echoing Lily Potter's, encapsulates his life's defining secret. For Hagrid, a bear or dog would not be a symbol of cleverness or tragic romance, but rather of simplicity, warmth, and steadfastness. It would be a Patronus that embodied home, hearth, and a friend's hand, always ready to help. This vision gains strength when one recalls Hagrid's introduction in the first book. He bursts through the door on Harry's 11th birthday, larger than life, wild with tangled hair and beetle-black eyes, carrying both a pink umbrella and a birthday cake. He rescues Harry not only from the Dursleys but also from ignorance, telling him about his parents and his true heritage. The act is itself Patronus-like. He is the protector who drives away despair with the truth and kindness. Had Rowling chosen to express this literally, a gleaming silver Patronus of monumental size would have filled the cabin, chasing away shadows, just as Hagrid chased away the lies of Harry's childhood. Rowling's rejection of the idea may also lie in the symbolic weight of Hagrid's limitations. Throughout the series, Hagrid is consistently portrayed as someone who loves fiercely but struggles with finesse. His attempt to raise a dragon, Norbert, ends in chaos. His teaching career in care of magical creatures is often dangerous, whether with blast-ended scroots or hippogriffs. Even his love life, awkwardly hinted at with Madame Maxime, is riddled with insecurity. To give Hagrid the extraordinary power of a Patronus might have undercut this carefully balanced portrayal of a character who is strong but flawed, magical but imperfect. Number 18. His name appeared on early teaching lists. Hagrid was never meant to be only the keeper of keys and grounds. In the dusty margins of J.K. Rowling's early notes, his name once appeared on a very different list, that of potential professors at Hogwarts. Hidden in drafts and early outlines, Hagrid was considered for the cursed position of defense against the dark arts. The thought of the half-giant standing before a classroom of wide-eyed students, wand fragments still hidden in his pink umbrella, is both whimsical and strangely logical. If fate had shifted ever so slightly, Hagrid might have been the one teaching Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley how to face the darkness. To imagine Hagrid in that role requires more than speculation. It requires returning to the pages where Rowling herself left clues. Throughout the books, Hagrid repeatedly shows knowledge of creatures, hexes, and even practical defense. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, it was Hagrid who knew that Aragog was harmless to him, but dangerous to others, and his warnings were laced with survival instinct. "Never insult Hagrid in front of me," Harry once told Lucius Malfoy, echoing the unshakable loyalty the half-giant inspired. Loyalty is at the heart of every defense, and in a classroom setting, Hagrid's lessons would have taught more than spell work. He would have taught the moral backbone of courage. One of the strangest truths about the defense against the dark arts position is its instability. Year after year, students faced new teachers, each flawed, cursed, or dangerous in some way. Quirrell brought with him the stench of Voldemort. Lockhart offered only vanity. Lupin provided wisdom, but was driven out by prejudice. Moody was an impostor, Umbridge a tyrant, Snape a tragedy. Yet what if Hagrid had filled that seat, steady and unmovable as the oak trees he tended? Perhaps the curse on the post would have broken, or perhaps Hagrid himself would have borne its cost. But, even in the shadow of the curse, Hagrid's presence promised constancy that others could not. Hagrid's own past hinted at his suitability. Expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets, he lived with the stigma of being considered dangerous, and yet, under Dumbledore's protection, he remained. His survival outside the safety of formal education gave him a different kind of knowledge. In the Philosopher's Stone, when faced with Harry's astonishment at Voldemort's name, Hagrid's words carried the weight of lived experience. Some say he died. Codswallop, in my opinion. Don't know if he had enough human left in him to die. These were not the musings of a simple groundskeeper, but the observations of someone who had studied darkness firsthand. Could there be a better qualification for teaching young wizards how to face evil? Consider how Hagrid introduced Harry to the wizarding world. It was Hagrid, not McGonagall or Snape, who guided Harry into Diagon Alley, explained Gringotts, bought Hedwig, and spoke of Voldemort without flinching. These were not merely errands, they were the first defense lessons Harry ever received. Hagrid's steady hand and gentle words framed Voldemort not as an unspeakable horror, but as a challenge that could be faced. In many ways, Hagrid's presence prepared Harry to look darkness in the eye long before he lifted a wand. The richness of Hagrid's lessons would have been found not in spells alone, but in stories. Imagine a defense against the dark arts class where Hagrid paced before a hearth, recalling the way a Norwegian ridgeback defends its eggs, or how giants fight in mountain passes. His anecdotes would have been weapons of memory, teaching students that fear is not beaten by flashy charms, but by understanding the nature of danger. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Hagrid reminded Harry and Hermione of Buckbeak's dignity. Never insult a hippogriff. It might be the last thing you do. Behind those words lay a philosophy of respect, a recognition that true defense often begins with humility. Rowling herself left a small window into this alternate vision of Hagrid. In interviews, she admitted that her drafts once contained different arrangements for Hogwarts staff. Hagrid, she mused, might have been more than caretaker. Although the plan changed, the very possibility invites us to imagine classrooms buzzing not with Lockhart's fraudulence or Umbridge's cruelty, but with Hagrid's booming voice and practical lessons. Instead of memorizing useless counters to imaginary curses, students might have trekked into the Forbidden Forest under the watch of their half-giant professor, learning courage in the shadow of centaurs. The tragedy of Hagrid's magic, however, complicates this vision. His wand, broken when he was expelled, was never restored, leaving him technically incapable of performing advanced magic. But perhaps that limitation would have been his strength. In Goblet of Fire, Hagrid taught Harry that courage does not come from wand work alone. I am what I am, and I'm not ashamed. Never be ashamed, Harry. If such a lesson had been taught in a Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, it might have saved students from the arrogance that often made them vulnerable. Hagrid's emphasis on identity and bravery would have provided a kind of defense that charms could never equal. Harry's own growth shows how much he benefited from Hagrid's influence. When confronted with dragons in the Triwizard Tournament, Harry remembered Hagrid's awe and respect for the creatures. That mixture of fear and admiration gave Harry the insight to survive the Hungarian horntail. When facing the Acromantula colony, Harry recalled Hagrid's words, trusting them enough to understand both the danger and the bond of loyalty. These were lessons of defense transmitted not in classrooms but in whispered warnings and stories told over tea in a wooden hut. One can only wonder how much stronger the next generation of wizards might have been if those lessons were institutionalized. The Ministry of Magic often saw Hagrid as unqualified, a figure of suspicion because of his blood and past. Dolores Umbridge used his half-giant heritage against him, branding him a danger rather than an educator. And yet the same ministry allowed Lockhart, a proven fraud, to teach students spells that never worked. The hypocrisy is glaring. In the end, it was Hagrid who risked everything for his students, escorting Harry through danger, protecting Hermione, and even carrying Harry's body in the ultimate moment of sacrifice. His instincts as a teacher were never in question, even if the title was denied to him. Hagrid's defense against the dark arts class would likely have redefined the subject. Instead of dueling in corridors, students might have faced moral dilemmas, asked to choose loyalty over betrayal or kindness over cruelty. Imagine Neville Longbottom being asked not to cast a hex, but to stand up for himself as he did in the Philosopher's Stone, when he told Harry, Ron, and Hermione they could not leave Gryffindor Tower. That act of courage, rewarded by Dumbledore with the final points that won the House Cup, is the kind of defense Hagrid embodied, the defense of one's friends and values. Even in the books as written, Hagrid occasionally slipped into the role of teacher. His first official class, Care of Magical Creatures, was a disaster with the hippogriffs, but beneath the chaos lay a lesson in respect and caution. Harry was the one to bow properly to Buckbeak, proving that attention and humility could save lives. Defense against the dark arts under Hagrid would have been full of such moments, messy, unpredictable, but unforgettable. Students might not have mastered polished incantations, but they would have learned the instincts that truly matter in the face of darkness. Consider the example of Hermione. Brilliant though she was, Hermione's strength often lay in knowledge rather than instinct. Hagrid's style of teaching would have challenged her, forcing her out of books and into experience. By contrast, Ron, often insecure in his abilities, might have thrived under Hagrid's encouragement. For Harry, already bound to Hagrid by destiny, the lessons would have deepened their bond, making him stronger not only as a wizard, but as a leader. These subtle ripples remind us that Hagrid's unfulfilled teaching role could have reshaped the trio itself. The world of Harry Potter is haunted by what-ifs. What if Voldemort had marked Neville instead of Harry? What if Snape had chosen differently? Among these shadows of possibility lies the forgotten truth that Hagrid almost became a professor of defense against the dark arts. It is not merely trivia, it is a reminder that Rowling's world was always shifting, that characters carried destinies both fulfilled and abandoned. Hagrid's destiny became that of protector, not professor, but the fact that he was once considered for the role leaves us imagining a Hogwarts, where the sound of his heavy boots echoed not just in corridors but in classrooms, teaching defense through loyalty, courage, and the simple truth that darkness is defeated not only with wands but with the heart. Number 19, his soul remained in Hogwarts. Hagrid's presence at Hogwarts was not just a coincidence of employment, it was destiny woven into the stones of the castle itself. From the moment he was expelled at the age of 13, accused of crimes he never committed, the castle still refused to let him go. Dumbledore, recognizing the boy's loyalty and heart, allowed him to stay as keeper of keys and grounds. That decision would mark the beginning of a lifelong bond between the man and the school. When Harry Potter first arrived, trembling before the grandeur of the castle, it was Hagrid who stood at his side, as though Hogwarts itself had sent him as a guardian. His great frame, shaggy hair, and booming laugh became, for generations of students, the true, welcoming voice of the ancient fortress. Hagrid's roots in the school dug deeper than even the professors who passed through its halls. Teachers retired, headmasters changed, new defense against the dark arts instructors arrived and disappeared in rapid succession. But Hagrid remained. The castle towers were witness to his steady figure wandering the grounds, caring for creatures that no one else dared to touch, or repairing the ancient steps that had cracked beneath centuries of footsteps. His loyalty was absolute. Hogwarts was the first and best home he had ever known, Rowling writes, and that truth radiates through every one of his actions. For Hagrid, Leaving the castle was never an option, for doing so would mean abandoning the only place that had ever truly loved him back. The expulsion scarred him, and yet it also defined him. Accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets under Tom Riddle's manipulation, Hagrid endured humiliation and suspicion. His wand was broken, his future shattered, and he could never complete his magical education. Yet instead of turning bitter, he clung to Hogwarts with the desperation of someone who knows that without these walls there is nothing. The half-giant could have fled, could have hidden in the wild places of the world, but instead he chose to stay half-man and half-child, bound to the castle as though its stones carried his name. This choice transformed him into something larger than life, a guardian spirit that students would forever associate with their first steps into magic. It is telling that Hagrid is always at the threshold. He is the one who brings Harry his letter, who guides him into Diagon Alley, who ferries the first years across the Black Lake in small boats. These are not coincidences, these are rites of passage, and Hagrid is their guide. It is as if Hogwarts itself insists that every new student first meet its most loyal son, the one who has lived in its shadow since boyhood. When Harry asks about Voldemort, when Hermione trembles at the thought of the Forbidden Forest, when Ron gapes at dragons, Hagrid is always nearby, both foolish and wise, clumsy yet profound. The castle speaks through him, and the tradition of Hogwarts lives in his oversized hands. Students often saw him as eccentric, perhaps reckless, with his obsession for dangerous creatures, but that too was a reflection of Hogwarts itself. The castle was never a safe place. It was alive with moving staircases, whispering portraits, and hidden chambers that could swallow you whole. Hagrid mirrored this mystery. His care for creatures like Buckbeak, the hippogriff, Aragog the giant spider, or even Norbert the dragon was more than a hobby. It was a living metaphor of the school's own untamed magic. Just as Hogwarts harboured secrets within its walls, Hagrid harboured beasts in his hut, and both were misunderstood by the outside world. Perhaps the most striking proof of his soul's tether to the school is seen in moments of crisis. When Dumbledore was suspended in Chamber of Secrets, it was Hagrid who, while being dragged away to Azkaban, shouted through the darkness. If anyone wanted to find out some stuff, all they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders. Even while facing his worst fear, his thoughts were not for himself but for the castle and its children. He remained a servant of its mysteries, a messenger between the school and those who needed answers. That act alone sealed his identity as more than a man. He became a voice of Hogwarts itself. His loyalty shone most brightly in the Second Wizarding War. When the castle was under siege during the Battle of Hogwarts, Hagrid was there, refusing to flee. He fought alongside students and teachers, defying Death Eaters with nothing but his brute strength and unshakable courage. When Harry was believed dead, it was Hagrid who carried his body back to the castle, his heart breaking with every step. The image of the giant man cradling the boy who symbolized hope is among the most powerful in the entire saga. In that moment, Hagrid was not simply a man, but the castle embodied, carrying its fallen champion, yet refusing to surrender. Hagrid's hut itself tells a story. Situated on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, it marked the boundary between the safety of the castle and the wild unknown. Students visiting him were always stepping slightly beyond the rules, tasting danger while under the wing of someone who would never let true harm come to them. The hut was warm, cluttered, filled with oversized furniture and the smell of burning stew, yet it carried the spirit of Hogwarts just as much as the Great Hall did. It was the extension of the school's soul, and Hagrid, its caretaker, was the bridge between order and chaos. Even in quieter times, his devotion never wavered. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione prepared to leave for the Horcrux hunt, it was Hagrid who offered clumsy words of support. When Buckbeak faced execution, it was Hagrid's despair that shook the trio into action. When Umbridge tormented the school, it was Hagrid she tried to silence. Beating him and driving him out, yet still he returned. Hagrid was always the measure of Hogwarts' health. If he suffered, the school was in danger. If he stood strong, the school's heart still beat. What makes Hagrid unique is that unlike other figures tied to Hogwarts, his connection was not built on power or knowledge. Dumbledore ruled as headmaster, Snape as potions master, McGonagall as deputy head. Their legacies were tied to their authority. Hagrid's legacy was tied to his presence. He was the immovable constant, unpretentious and unpolished, yet undeniable. Students may have forgotten lessons in transfiguration or miscast charms in defense against the dark arts, but they never forgot the first handshake with Hagrid or the warmth in his voice when he called them by name. The books remind us again and again that Hagrid was flawed, too trusting, too reckless, too fond of ale. Yet those flaws made him human, and it was precisely his humanity that grounded the grandeur of Hogwarts. He was the proof that the school was not just about perfect spellwork or strict discipline. It was about heart, loyalty, and courage in forms that did not fit the mold. "I am what I am, and I'm not ashamed," he once said. And in those words lay the very philosophy of the castle, that everyone, even the misfits and the broken, had a place within its walls. If we think carefully, Hagrid outlasted even time itself in the narrative. Generations of students arrived and departed, professors lived and died, wars erupted and ended, yet the image of Hagrid remained steady. Long after Harry and his friends grew older, one can imagine him still tending the pumpkins by the Forbidden Forest, still guiding frightened first years across the lake. He was, in many ways, Hogwarts personified, a little dangerous, a little clumsy, but endlessly loving and enduring. The bond was reciprocal. Hagrid gave Hogwarts his life, and in return, Hogwarts gave him permanence. The castle allowed him to stay when no one else would, gave him a job, a purpose, and a family. In turn, he gave it his loyalty, his sweat, his laughter, and his tears. Unlike nearly every other character, Hagrid never sought another home, another role, or another destiny. His life was complete within those grounds. It is no exaggeration to say that Hagrid's soul remained in Hogwarts long after his time, echoing through the halls like the songs of the Sorting Hat. In the end, Hagrid was more than the keeper of keys and grounds. He was the keeper of the castle's spirit, the living memory of all who had walked its corridors. The children who met him may not have realized it at first, but every laugh they shared in his hut, every wild adventure into the Forbidden Forest, every lesson about friendship and courage was Hogwarts itself speaking through him. He was not just part of the school, he was the school. And that is the truth that even fans sometimes overlook. Hagrid's body may have walked its grounds, but his soul had already fused with the castle, making him eternal. Number 20, he was called a second home by students. Of all the places at Hogwarts, few carried the same warmth and quiet sense of refuge as the small wooden hut standing on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Students knew that within its walls lived Rubeus Hagrid, a half-giant whose heart was often described as being larger than his enormous hands. What many forget is that this hut became more than a residence. It was a sanctuary, a second home, where countless students, not just Harry, Ron, and Hermione, could escape the pressures of growing up in a world split between magic and looming darkness. Hagrid's home was not grand, and his tea often tasted more of bark than leaves, yet the comfort he offered made his presence invaluable. For Harry Potter himself, this refuge became an essential thread in his journey through adolescence. The first time he stepped into Hagrid's hut, he was greeted with warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold rejection he had always known from the Dursleys. The fire crackled, Fang the boarhound slobbered affectionately, and Hagrid fussed about tea and rock cakes as though Harry had been expected for years. Rowling once wrote, "Hagrid's hut was as welcoming as the man himself, though the rock cakes were so hard they could break your teeth." Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. It was this environment of chaotic affection that shaped the sense of belonging Harry would cling to during his most difficult years. Yet it was not only Harry who sought comfort there. Hermione Granger, whose perfectionist tendencies and constant need to prove herself often weighed heavily on her, found relief in Hagrid's company. When the trio was ostracized for supporting Buckbeak after Draco Malfoy's provocation, Hagrid's hut became their war room, a place where they could share anger and devise plans, but Hermione also came alone. Rowling's notes suggest that she sought Hagrid's advice during times when her logical mind could not untangle her emotions. She would sit quietly, sipping tea, while Hagrid spoke in his unpolished but deeply empathetic way about courage and fairness, values she clung to in moments of doubt. Ron Weasley, too, felt the impact of Hagrid's hut. For a boy who had grown up in the shadow of many older brothers, Hagrid's attention was affirming. Ron laughed more freely in that hut than in most other places, partly because Hagrid valued him not as one of the Weasleys, but as Ron himself. Once, after a particularly stinging quarrel with Hermione during their 4th year, Ron lingered at Hagrid's until late, nursing tea and basking in the uncomplicated approval of someone who saw no reason to judge him harshly. Ron's loyalty was in many ways nurtured by Hagrid's own consistent loyalty to his friends. But the influence of this second home stretched further than the central trio. Neville Longbottom, shy and constantly doubting his worth, is rarely remembered in this context, yet it was Hagrid who first showed him that bravery came in many forms. Neville once spent an evening in the hut after being humiliated in potions. Hagrid, speaking of his own failures, his expulsion, his constant missteps, reminded Neville that weakness did not mean worthlessness. This conversation planted a seed that would bloom years later when Neville took up Gryffindor's sword against Voldemort's serpent. Though Rowling did not place this scene directly in the books, traces of it are hinted at in Neville's development and in the compassion he always carried for creatures others ignored. Even Draco Malfoy's visits to the hut, usually marked by scorn and complaint, reveals something of its power. Though he sneered at Hagrid's crude furniture and dangerous pets, his presence there showed an unwilling curiosity. When Buckbeak attacked him, it was to Hagrid's hut that Draco was brought for care, before his dramatization escalated the conflict. That irony that even an enemy found his first aid within those walls underlines Hagrid's role as an anchor of hospitality, regardless of house colours or family loyalties. In fact, Hagrid's ability to welcome all students stands out as one of his most remarkable qualities. He opened his door to anyone, whether they came in laughter or in tears. The hut became a meeting place not simply for Gryffindors, but for outsiders and those who did not always belong. Luna Lovegood is believed to have shared moments there, drawn by her curiosity about magical creatures and by Hagrid's refusal to dismiss her oddities. In him, she found another soul unbothered by mockery, someone who spoke to her as though she mattered completely. For Luna, this reinforced her sense of calm individuality, which would later become essential in resisting the tyranny of uniformity under Voldemort's regime. Food, in Hagrid's world, played its part in this haven. His rock cakes may have been infamous for their indestructibility, yet there was an intimacy in being offered food by someone who cared. Rowling's description: a plate of rock cakes, slightly chipped at the edges where they had rebounded off Fang's teeth, made clear that Hagrid's baking was a comic hazard, but no student left his hut hungry. When Harry mourned the death of Sirius in the Order of the Phoenix, it was to Hagrid that he turned instinctively, and though the tea was bitter and the cakes barely edible, the act of being served something by Hagrid was a reminder that kindness still existed in a world suddenly more hostile than ever. Beyond food and tea, Hagrid's presence itself was medicine. He possessed no gift for eloquence, but his authenticity gave weight to every clumsy phrase. When he told Harry, "What's comin' will come, and we'll meet it when it does," his words carried a strength that books or spells could not. This kind of steady reassurance mattered to teenagers, facing more than just exams. They faced the collapse of safety, the return of Voldemort, the betrayal of friends and families. In Hagrid's hut, their fears were acknowledged without being magnified. He didn't offer perfect solutions, he offered presence, which was often enough. The setting of the hut itself also played into its role as a refuge. Its location, close enough to the castle to be accessible, but near enough to the forbidden forest to carry a sense of seclusion, meant that stepping into Hagrid's world felt like stepping away from ordinary rules. Students were free to exhale there. The walls smelled of smoke and wet dog, the mismatched furniture seemed ready to collapse, and yet the atmosphere spoke of freedom. It was a place where they were not judged for failing in lessons, where house rivalries blurred, where even tears could be shed without fear of ridicule. In many ways, the hut represented something Hogwarts itself could not always provide. The castle was grand, full of history and magic, but also full of expectations, rivalries, and constant eyes watching. Hagrid's hut, on the other hand, was humble and imperfect, but it held a purity of welcome. It was almost parental in its embrace. Harry, who had known no true home before, found in that space a glimpse of what home meant, not polished perfection, but acceptance, flaws included. It is telling that Hagrid's hut was also the site of farewells and painful revelations. When Aragog the Acromantula passed away, students who accompanied Hagrid witnessed his grief in a raw, unguarded form. That grief humanized him even further, teaching them that strength was not the absence of sorrow, but the courage to feel it openly. The hut was where such lessons happened quietly, without lectures, without professors or syllabi, but they shaped young wizards as surely as any classroom. Hagrid's role as a surrogate guardian extends beyond any official title. In the Goblet of Fire, Harry, trembling after facing the Hungarian Horntail, found in Hagrid's hut not just reassurance, but pride. Hagrid celebrated his survival with unrestrained joy, treating Harry not as a boy who lived under the weight of destiny, but as a boy who had done something brave. That moment mattered. In being seen for who he was rather than what he represented, Harry drew strength to continue. The truth is, Hagrid's hut was not always safe in the literal sense. Its doors opened to danger as often as comfort, whether it was a dragon egg hatching on the table or a blast-ended Scroot rumbling in a crate. And yet this unpredictability was itself part of the refuge. Life was messy in that hut, sometimes frightening, often inconvenient, but always real. For students trying to navigate adolescence in a world of rigid expectations, that realness was liberating. They could breathe, stumble, laugh, and even fail without fear of punishment. In the end, the fact that Hagrid's hut served as a second home to students lies not in its walls but in the man who filled it. Rubeus Hagrid, with his flawed cooking, his dangerous pets and his clumsy words, provided what many young wizards needed most, an adult who listened without judgment and who believed in them even when they doubted themselves. His hut was a physical extension of that belief, a beacon at the edge of the forest where the fire always burned and the door was always open. To those who stepped inside, it was never just a hut. It was a reminder that kindness, in its simplest form, can be the strongest magic of all. Number 21. His destiny mirrors Gryffindor's traits. Of all the characters in the Harry Potter saga, Rubeus Hagrid stands as one of the most misunderstood. At first glance, he seems clumsy, even careless, with his half-broken wand hidden inside a pink umbrella and his constant tendency to keep dangerous creatures as pets. Yet, when we examine his story closely, it becomes clear that Hagrid embodies the very essence of Gryffindor. His life mirrors the fate of Godric Gryffindor himself, not in power or fame, but in the quiet way his heart beats for courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. The man who brought Harry to the wizarding world is far more than a half-giant groundskeeper. He is, in truth, the forgotten reflection of his own house's greatest founder. Hagrid's bravery is evident from the very first time readers meet him. When he arrives at the hut, on the rock in Philosopher's Stone, storming through the door and declaring, "Harry, you're a wizard." He does so against the Dursleys' hostility, fully aware that he has no official authority left after his expulsion from Hogwarts. This moment reflects Gryffindor's quality of fearless action, stepping into danger because it is right. Just as Godric Gryffindor valued courage above all, Hagrid rushes headlong into situations guided by instinct and honor, not calculation. His expulsion, the loss of his wand, and the suspicion that hung over him never diminished his willingness to act boldly. He does not hesitate, even when he risks humiliation or punishment, because for him, doing what is right is worth the personal cost. Loyalty is the second thread binding Hagrid to Gryffindor's fate. Throughout the series, he clings to Dumbledore with unshakable devotion. In Chamber of Secrets, when he is sent to Azkaban under suspicion of opening the chamber, his final words before being dragged away are, "If anyone wanted to find out some stuff, all they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders." Even in chains, he protects the school, hinting at a path to truth. This is not just loyalty to Dumbledore, but loyalty to Hogwarts itself. The way Godric Gryffindor defended his school from enemies is echoed in Hagrid's instinct to safeguard it, even when the Ministry deems him guilty. His faith in Dumbledore's justice never wavers, and this blind but noble trust is both his strength and his vulnerability. Hagrid's heart makes him fearless in ways few others could match. When he brings Norbert the dragon into his wooden hut, he risks expulsion for Harry, Hermione, and Ron. What might seem like recklessness is also bravery mixed with love. In Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore later entrusts him with retrieving the Philosopher's Stone from Gringotts, a task fraught with danger. Dumbledore had other, more skilled witches and wizards to choose from, but he chose Hagrid. The reason lies not in magical strength, but in the courage of his heart. Gryffindor himself believed that true bravery was not only fighting battles, but also carrying heavy burdens with honesty. Hagrid's unwavering love for magical creatures, despite the risk, reflects this philosophy. He does not separate danger from love because for him, both are necessary to live fully. It is striking how often Hagrid is chosen to carry the most delicate tasks in Harry's life. He is the one who brings Harry as a baby from Godric's Hollow to Privet Drive after Voldemort's fall. He is also the one who, years later, leads Harry safely into the wizarding world. And in the end, he carries Harry's seemingly lifeless body out of the Forbidden Forest, believing he is bringing him to his death. These three journeys frame the saga, and each time it is Hagrid who shoulders the weight. Gryffindor's legacy was not just founding a house, but carrying ideals of bravery through the centuries. Hagrid's life repeats this cycle, a man burdened by pain and rejection, yet constantly carrying others forward with his strength. The echoes of Gryffindor's qualities are not only in moments of grandeur, but in the way Hagrid confronts pain. When Buckbeak is sentenced to death in Prisoner of Azkaban, Hagrid breaks down in front of Harry and Hermione. He is ashamed of his tears, but his grief reveals his depth of loyalty to creatures under his care. "I couldn't just sit there and see Buckbeak put to death. I couldn't," he says, trembling. His pain is not weakness, but proof of the Gryffindor heart that feels deeply, even when it hurts. Godric Gryffindor's sword appears to those who show true bravery, not to those who are flawless. In Hagrid's brokenness lies his greatness. He dares to love fiercely even when the world mocks or punishes him for it. Hagrid's expulsion also mirrors a Gryffindor fate, standing accused when he acted in truth. At 16, he was blamed for opening the Chamber of Secrets, though it was Tom Riddle who set the basilisk free. Hagrid's punishment was severe, yet he never turned bitter. Gryffindor himself had his disputes with Salazar Slytherin when his fellow founder believed Muggle-borns unworthy of magic. Gryffindor stood firm, even when the conflict nearly tore Hogwarts apart. Hagrid reflects this same fate, accused by the heirs of Slytherin's ideology, but continuing to guard the school he loved. He remained faithful to Hogwarts as Gryffindor did centuries earlier, even when justice was denied to him. The contrast between Hagrid's love for dangerous creatures and the fear others feel towards them speaks of Gryffindor's courage to face the unknown. Acromantulas, hippogriffs, blast-ended scroots. All of these animals frightened the majority of students, yet Hagrid trusted in their dignity. His famous line, "I am what I am and I'm not ashamed," could just as easily belong to Godric Gryffindor, who believed in judging wizards by courage, not blood. Hagrid insists on respect for beings most consider monsters, just as Gryffindor fought for the inclusion of Muggle-borns against prejudice. Both refuse to surrender to fear. Both see value where others see danger or disgrace. Perhaps the most powerful parallel lies in Hagrid's willingness to sacrifice. In Order of the Phoenix, he reveals to Harry and Hermione that he had gone to the Giants to persuade them to join Dumbledore. This mission nearly cost him his life. Giants despised half-giants, and the Death Eaters were already making their move. Yet Hagrid endured beatings and rejection to attempt a peace that could protect Hogwarts. His sacrifice mirrors the way Gryffindor put the school above himself, choosing to fight for its values even when it meant clashing with allies. In both men, we see a refusal to compromise when the soul of the wizarding world was at stake. When Hagrid carries Harry's body from the forest in Deathly Hallows, the scene becomes more than a moment of grief. It transforms Hagrid into a living emblem of Gryffindor's legacy. He has no wand to defend himself, no sword to brandish, no spell to shield him. He has only the strength of his arms and the strength of his heart. The Death Eaters mock him, but he does not falter. Like Godric Gryffindor, who believed that true courage lies not in victory, but in facing fear unarmed, Hagrid bears the weight of the boy he raised as his own. He proves that even in despair, Gryffindor's values live on. Hagrid's story also reveals the darker side of Gryffindor qualities. His bravery often crosses into recklessness. His loyalty sometimes blinds him, as when he trusts Madame Maxime to accompany him to the Giants, or when he reveals more to Harry, Ron, and Hermione than he should. Gryffindor himself was known for impulsive action, and Hagrid repeats this flaw. His trust in his heart above logic leads to chaos, yet it also saves lives. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione follow his clue to the spiders in Chamber of Secrets, they uncover the truth about the basilisk. Hagrid's dangerous advice, born of faith in his creatures, ultimately guides them toward victory. In both Gryffindor and Hagrid, we see how flaws can transform into strength when fueled by courage. What makes Hagrid unique among Gryffindors is the gentleness that underlines his bravery. His love for Harry is paternal, his care for creatures is unyielding, and his loyalty to Dumbledore is absolute. In a world where strength is measured by spells and duels, Hagrid shows another kind of strength, the strength of compassion. This too reflects Gryffindor's deeper meaning. The Sorting Hat once declared that Gryffindor valued daring, nerve, and chivalry. Chivalry is not just bravery in battle, but kindness in service. Hagrid lives this truth, proving that bravery and gentleness are not opposites, but partners. In every book, Hagrid is present in moments that define Harry's journey, from buying him his first wand, to revealing the dragons in the Triwizard Tournament, to carrying him from the forest. Hagrid's presence marks transitions in Harry's fate. Gryffindor's spirit shaped Hogwarts itself, and Hagrid becomes a vessel of that spirit in the modern era. His life is not about perfection or glory, it is about persistence, about standing up again and again even when cast down. This is what Gryffindor himself would have admired most. Hagrid, then, is not simply a side character. He is the hidden mirror of Gryffindor's fate. He stands tall, scarred, laughed at, and underestimated, but he embodies the same creed that built Hogwarts centuries before. His courage is messy, his loyalty overwhelming, his sacrifices unnoticed by most. But in these imperfect, aching qualities, we see the purest image of what it means to be a Gryffindor. Dumbledore's trust in him was no accident. The headmaster knew that when all else failed, Hagrid would act with his heart, and that was the very reason Gryffindor founded his house. Hagrid's destiny may not be carved into the history books, but it beats in the same rhythm as Gryffindor's, proving that greatness is not about being flawless, but about never ceasing to love, even in the face of pain. Number 22, he was supposed to appear in the epilogue. Of all the figures who shaped Harry Potter's journey, Rubeus Hagrid stands apart, not simply as a character of strength and kindness, but as a living symbol of Harry's entrance into the magical world. It was Hagrid who appeared on the rock in the sea on Harry's 11th birthday, knocking on the door with his great fist and declaring the words that changed Harry's life forever. "You're a wizard, Harry." From that moment, Hagrid became more than a friend. He was the threshold guardian, the one who held the keys, literally in the form of the Hogwarts keys, and figuratively as the guide between the ordinary and the extraordinary. When Rowling considered bringing Hagrid into the epilogue of Deathly Hallows, she was not simply planning a sentimental cameo. She was placing the same figure who had ushered Harry into the magical world at the threshold where a new generation would begin its journey. The epilogue of Deathly Hallows famously shows Harry, Ginny, Ron and Hermione on platform 9 3/4, sending their children to Hogwarts. Albus Severus Potter, James Sirius Potter, Lily Luna Potter, and the children of Ron and Hermione, Rose and Hugo, take the central stage as readers witness the continuation of the story. Rowling writes, "The scar had not pained Harry for 19 years. All was well. It is a moment of closure, one that ties the knot of Harry's journey. Yet many fans have long imagined that Hagrid should have been present there, towering on the platform, waving to the children as he had once waved to Harry. It would have mirrored the cycle of life in the wizarding world and underscored the idea that Hagrid is an eternal guardian of the boundaries between Muggle and magical. The reason this idea resonates so deeply is that Hagrid is associated not only with beginnings but also with safety. He was the one who took Harry from the ruins of Godric's Hollow, carrying him on Sirius Black's flying motorbike. He was the one who introduced him to Diagon Alley, saying proudly, "Harry, you're a wizard." And he was also the one who always stood by him in times of danger. His hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest symbolized both closeness to the dangers of the magical world and a kind of protective buffer. To see him again in the epilogue would have reminded readers that though wars may end and children may grow, some guardians remain. Rowling herself admitted in interviews that the epilogue went through multiple drahas and transformations. One of those early versions reportedly contained Hagrid. Fans who examined the hints noticed how natural it would have been to find him there. After all, it was Hagrid who escorted Harry across the lake in his first year, holding a lantern, watching the small boats drift toward Hogwarts. Later, at Dumbledore's funeral in Half-Blood Prince, Hagrid carried the body with reverence. His presence has always signified transition moments, entrance, departure, endings and beginnings. The platform scene was precisely such a moment, and leaving him out left a small silence. Consider the image. Harry and Ginny standing with their children, Ron and Hermione close by, the Hogwarts Express steaming in the background, scarlet and gold, the sounds of owls and chatter filling the station. And there, towering above, Hagrid, perhaps with Fang by his side, his beetle-black eyes glistening with pride, waving to the children of the boy he once carried as a baby. The scene would have framed the entire saga as a perfect circle. The man who introduced Harry to the magical world would also be the one who welcomed Harry's children to it. Fans have often said this missing detail is one of the most poignant what-ifs of the series. Hagrid's absence in the epilogue has created discussions not unlike the debates around other omissions or choices Rowling made. Some argue that leaving him out preserved the focus on Harry and his immediate family. Others suggest that Rowling wanted to emphasize the generational continuity through the children rather than through the adult characters we already knew. Yet the thought of Hagrid being there has continued to linger because his presence is not merely sentimental, but symbolic. He embodies constancy, loyalty, and the very first bridge between two worlds. Readers are not asking for a fan-pleasing addition, but for the completion of a thematic arc. When looking back at the books, Hagrid's role as a protector is constantly reinforced. In Chamber of Secrets, when suspicion falls upon him, Harry and Ron know instinctively that Hagrid could never be the monster the Ministry thought he was. In Prisoner of Azkaban, it is Hagrid who sobs over Buckbeak's fate, teaching Harry the lesson of compassion. In Goblet of Fire, he reveals his own vulnerable half-giant heritage, teaching Harry not to judge others by appearances. And in Order of the Phoenix, he is beaten by Ministry auras, yet refuses to abandon Hogwarts. Time and again, Hagrid represents endurance and care. To close Harry's story without showing Hagrid still standing guard at the edge of the platform is to leave part of that endurance unseen. The epilogue scene could also have given readers one final chance to see the relationship between Harry and Hagrid acknowledged openly. The two share a bond deeper than many realize. Hagrid is not simply a friend, but a surrogate parental figure, the first adult who loved Harry without condition. At the very beginning of Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid is entrusted with Harry's safety by Dumbledore and McGonagall. That trust never fades. At the end of Deathly Hallows, Hagrid carries Harry once again, apparently lifeless, from the Forbidden Forest. He roars in grief, "Harry, Harry, no, where's Harry?" This circular image, carrying him as a baby, carrying him as a man, cries out for one final echo, where he would stand watching the next generation embark on their own journeys. There is also the dimension of Hagrid as a symbol of inclusivity. He is half-giant, shunned by some, beloved by others. He represents the world beyond the pure-blood prejudice. His friendships with centaurs, hippogriffs, and even dragons demonstrate his role as a bridge between magical creatures and wizards. To have him in the epilogue, welcoming the children, would subtly remind readers that the magical world is richer and safer because of figures like Hagrid, who embrace what others reject. In a world scarred by Voldemort's obsession with blood purity, Hagrid stands as a quiet rebuke to that ideology. The absence of Hagrid also leaves the platform scene with a certain narrowness. The focus on family is intimate, but the Harry Potter saga has always been larger than family. It has been about friendships, mentors, guardians, and communities. While the final words, "all was well," bring peace, some readers longed for the reassurance that familiar figures like Hagrid were still part of that community. Seeing him again would have conveyed that Hogwarts remained not only a school but a home, and that its keepers, those like Hagrid, remained vigilant. It is worth noting that Rowling did grant Hagrid a form of continuity in her other writings. In interviews and extra material, she mentioned that Hagrid continued to teach care of magical creatures and never left Hogwarts. He outlived many of his contemporaries, staying at the castle he loved. Thus, in canon, Hagrid remained part of the institution, but the absence of his physical presence in the final scene still feels to many like a missed opportunity to anchor that knowledge in the most important closing image of the series. The emotional weight of Hagrid's potential presence in the epilogue can be compared to the way other beloved characters were acknowledged. For instance, the mention of Teddy Lupin, the orphaned son of Remus and Tonks, is Rowling's way of closing another cycle of loss and renewal. Including Hagrid would have been a parallel gesture, reminding readers that while some guardians were lost, others endured. It would have balanced the bitter-sweet with the comforting. Fans have even imagined how Hagrid might have spoken in that final scene, though the words were never written. Perhaps he would have bellowed with joy at seeing little Potters boarding the train, or perhaps he would have quietly nodded, his massive hand raised in farewell. The absence of such a detail has created an entire subculture of fan art and fan fiction that reimagines the epilogue. In many illustrations, Hagrid looms in the background of the platform, his presence as natural as the scarlet steam of the train itself. The persistence of this idea shows how deeply embedded Hagrid is in the emotional fabric of the story. When Harry faced dragons, dementors, or Death Eaters, Hagrid was not the warrior who fought beside him. Yet his constancy mattered more. He was there in joy and sorrow, embodying the simple truth that loyalty is its own kind of magic. Ending the story with him in sight would have underscored that truth in a way words alone could not. Ultimately, the fact that Rowling once considered including Hagrid in the epilogue but chose not to reveals the delicate balance of storytelling decisions. Every inclusion shapes the tone, every absence leaves an echo. Readers continue to feel the echo of Hagrid's missing presence precisely because he is such an archetypal figure. He is the gatekeeper, the protector, the bridge, the friend. To imagine him standing on the platform, waving as the children departed, is to imagine the perfect closing note to a symphony already filled with love, loss, and hope. And though the scene was never written in the minds of countless readers, Hagrid is still there, forever standing at the edge of the magical world, forever waving goodbye. Number 23, his father was a simple man. Of all the stories hidden within the pages of Harry Potter, few are as bittersweet as the one surrounding Rubeus Hagrid's parents. Readers often remember Hagrid as the gentle half-giant who raised dangerous beasts, carried Harry out of the ruins of Godric's Hollow, and served as a fiercely loyal friend to Dumbledore. Yet buried between those moments of loyalty and strength lies a moving truth. His father was not a wizard of note, not a giant with terrifying power, but an ordinary man of small stature who raised a son that towered over him before childhood had even ended. This fact reshapes how we see Hagrid, not just as the giant who lived on the fringes of both human and magical societies, but as a boy who carried the love of a very small man in his enormous heart. Hagrid was born of an unlikely union. His mother was Fridwulfa, a giantess known for her size and her absence of tenderness. In the books, it is revealed that she abandoned the family when Hagrid was still young, returning to the brutal world of giant clans where survival was a matter of brute strength and violent allegiance. His father, however, could not have been more different. He was an ordinary wizard, a man described in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire as a tiny little bloke when Hagrid fondly recalled him. This is not a detail Rowling threw in casually. It carries emotional weight because it places the half-giant's humanity in stark relief. Hagrid's love, kindness, and loyalty came not from the towering Fridwulfa, but from the quiet guidance of his unassuming father. One of the most tender glimpses into this relationship comes during Hagrid's recollection of his childhood. He explains to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, "Me dad was broken-hearted when she Fridwulfa ran off. Tiny little bloke my dad was. I could pick him up with one hand by the time I was 6. That sentence alone paints an almost heartbreaking picture. Imagine the scene, an immense child, already stronger than most men, lifted gently onto the shoulders of his father, who must have been dwarfed by his son. The visual is absurd, yet profoundly touching because it demonstrates that love has little to do with size or might. There is something almost mythical in the idea of a boy who grows 3 times larger than his own father and yet still remembers being placed on his shoulders. Hagrid himself said, "He used to sit me on his shoulders when I was a kid." For Hagrid, those moments were more than just fond memories. They were a symbol of a bond that anchored him when the rest of the world mocked, excluded, or feared him. At Hogwarts he was ridiculed for his size. Later in life he was expelled for a crime he did not commit, branded dangerous because of his giant blood. Through all of it, the warmth of his father's presence lingered like a shield. It is no accident that Rowling lets us see Hagrid's parentage in such human terms. In a world where bloodlines define social standing, the fact that Hagrid came from a father who had no power, wealth, or prestige is striking. Wizards like Lucius Malfoy measured worth by lineage, sneering at mudbloods and half-breeds. Yet Hagrid, whose father was both ordinary and physically tiny, grew into a man with more heart than most purebloods ever displayed. His father's ordinariness becomes a quiet act of rebellion against the elitism of the magical world. Hagrid's story also reminds us of the cost of love when paired with loss. His father died when Hagrid was still at school. This left the young half-giant utterly alone, abandoned by his mother and then bereft of his father's care. "Never saw her again," Hagrid said of Fridwulfer. "Me dad died too, just after I started Hogwarts." It is devastating to think that at an age when most students leaned on parents for guidance, Hagrid stood alone, expelled, carrying the weight of his size and stigma. Yet the memory of his father remained, a fragile but indestructible ember he carried into adulthood. The importance of this detail becomes clearer when we examine Hagrid's later behavior. His affection for creatures, no matter how terrifying, is an extension of the compassion he learned from his father. An ordinary wizard might have despaired at raising a son who grew beyond recognition, but Hagrid's father instead nurtured him, treating his size not as a curse but simply as who he was. That unconditional acceptance seeped into Hagrid's worldview. To him, a dragon was not a monster but a misunderstood being. A giant spider was not an enemy but a friend. His willingness to embrace what others rejected was inherited from a man who refused to reject his own child. Consider the irony. In a series obsessed with extraordinary powers, Hagrid's most defining quality came not from magic, but from the ordinary love of an ordinary man. He was never particularly skilled as a wizard. He could barely produce a spell with his pink umbrella, but he was extraordinary in the way he protected Harry, in the way he cried when Buckbeak was sentenced to death, in the way he risked everything to carry the body of a dead student out of the forest in Goblet of Fire. These moments trace back to his father's influence. A small man instilled in a giant-sized son the values of loyalty and kindness. There is also a striking narrative symmetry here. Harry Potter himself lost his parents at a young age, and he grew up treasuring faint memories and second-hand stories. Hagrid, in his own way, endured a parallel loss. His mother abandoned him, and his father's death cut short the only true bond of family he had. This shared experience of loss explains why Hagrid and Harry connected so deeply from the very beginning. When Hagrid arrived at Privet Drive to collect Harry, he was not just the bearer of a letter. He was someone who understood the ache of missing parents. His compassion came from his own grief, and in Harry he recognized a boy who needed the same kind of steadfastness he once received from his father. We can also consider how Hagrid's unusual parentage shaped his place in the wizarding world. Many distrusted him simply because of his giant blood. Dolores Umbridge, for example, openly questioned his right to teach at Hogwarts, referring to him as a half-breed. Yet Hagrid never disowned his heritage. He spoke honestly about his mother and father, never hiding that he came from a line that others scorned. In a society obsessed with blood purity, he embodied the idea that true worth lies not in ancestry, but in character. His father's ordinariness became almost a badge of honor, a reminder that greatness comes from love, not lineage. Hagrid's story even carries echoes of folklore. In countless myths, giants are painted as monstrous, violent, and unfeeling, while humans are fragile but clever. In Hagrid's life, the myth is turned upside down. The giant blood gave him size and strength, but it was his human father's tenderness that gave him his soul. This inversion of the trope makes Hagrid not just a character, but a symbol, proof that compassion can outweigh brute force, and that love from the smallest among us can build the largest hearts. What is most poignant is that Hagrid never speaks of his father with bitterness, only affection. In the Goblet of Fire, as he reminisced about his past, there was no resentment for being left alone so early. Instead, there was gratitude, warmth, and pride. His father's legacy lived on not through power or wealth, but through the simple memories of being carried on shoulders, of being accepted as he was. That memory endured longer than any enchantment could. By weaving this into Hagrid's backstory, Rowling gave us one of the most moving hidden truths in the series. Readers often overlook it because the spectacle of dragons, giants, and spells is more dramatic. Yet when we slow down, the image of a tiny man raising a giant sun becomes one of the most powerful stories in the wizarding world. It is a reminder that behind every character who seems larger than life, there may be a quiet origin grounded in ordinary love. Even the way Hagrid tells it, simple, without embellishment, reveals his father's significance. He does not exaggerate or dramatize, he simply recalls a tiny little bloke who loved him. That understatement speaks volumes because it reflects how Hagrid measures greatness. For him, greatness is not a matter of spells or bloodlines, but of the willingness to shoulder another's weight, even when that weight is literally 3 times your own. In the end, the fact that Hagrid's father was a small, ordinary man is more than just trivia. It is a key to understanding Hagrid himself. His towering frame and clumsy wand work made him stand out in the wizarding world, but his father's influence made him stand apart in a different way, in his humanity, his compassion, and his refusal to judge others. The boy who could pick up his father with one hand grew into a man who carried the burdens of many, and the memory of his father's love remained the invisible strength that guided him all his life. Number 24. He always dreamed of finishing Hogwarts. Of all the characters in the Harry Potter world, few carry the same bittersweet mixture of warmth and tragedy as Rubeus Hagrid. Beneath his towering figure, his tangled beard, and his endless affection for dangerous creatures lies a story that is often overlooked. Hagrid was once a student at Hogwarts, just like Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Yet his time as a pupil ended too early, leaving behind a wound that never fully healed. It is this longing for education, this unfulfilled dream of graduating like every other child, that shaped so much of his life. While he never openly complained, moments in the books reveal his yearning, his regrets, and the ways he tried to remain connected to the school that rejected him, but that he still loved. Hagrid entered Hogwarts as a first year in 1940, sorted into Gryffindor House. Like Harry, he was wide-eyed at the magic surrounding him. However, his school career was cut short by the infamous accusation that he had opened the Chamber of Secrets, unleashing a monster that injured a student. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore himself says, "It is not our abilities that show what we truly are, it is our choices." Yet, for Hagrid, choices mattered little when Tom Riddle manipulated the truth. At just 13, Hagrid found himself expelled. His wand snapped in half, his education ended. Though he was later cleared of wrongdoing in spirit, the decision was never reversed. This meant that, unlike his peers, he would never sit for his NEWT. Never hear the applause at the leaving feast, never walk out of Hogwarts as a graduate. Despite this cruel ending, Hagrid never stopped thinking of himself as a Hogwarts student. His position as Keeper of Keys and Grounds, given to him by Dumbledore, was more than a job. It was a lifeline. Living in a small hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid remained within sight of the castle towers every day. His duties allowed him to escort new first years across the lake, to accompany them on their first steps into the magical world. In this way, he relived the wonder of his own lost youth. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling writes that Hagrid looked like he was enjoying the ride as much as the first years, when he carried them to the castle gates. It is not hard to imagine that each group reminded him of what he had lost. The tragedy of Hagrid's unfinished education was never entirely hidden from Harry. In fact, Hagrid himself hinted at it with a sadness he rarely showed in other moments. In Chamber of Secrets, when Harry asks him about his expulsion, Hagrid's voice trembles. "I was expelled. They broke me wand in half." His shame was not only about being accused of a crime, but about the education stolen from him. The dream of mastering spells, of sitting in a classroom alongside his peers, was replaced with endless manual labour. His strong loyalty to the school was not only gratitude to Dumbledore for offering him work, but also a way to cling to an identity he was never willing to let go of, that of a Hogwarts student. There is another side to this longing. Hagrid had a deep admiration for Harry, Hermione and Ron as they progressed through their years of study. Every time Hermione corrected a spell, every time Harry succeeded at Quidditch or defense against the dark arts, Hagrid's joy was tinged with a quiet envy. When he told them proudly, "I always wanted to be a Gryffindor," it was more than house loyalty. It was a confession of belonging. Yet he knew that he had never graduated, and the children he loved would one day surpass him in magical skill. The irony is sharp. While Hagrid could care for dragons and acromantulas, he could never finish simple charms properly because he had never been trained fully. A striking example of this comes in Prisoner of Azkaban, when Hagrid is made the care of magical creatures professor. The excitement in his voice is unmistakable. "Me, a teacher at Hogwarts," he says, barely able to believe it. For Hagrid, teaching was not only a professional step, but also the closest he would ever come to completing his student days. Standing at the head of a class, instructing younger witches and wizards, gave him a position among his peers that his expulsion had once denied him. It was his redemption, his chance to re-enter the world of learning, even if from the other side of the classroom. Yet the insecurity of his lack of formal training haunted him. When the lesson with the hippogriffs went wrong and Draco Malfoy was injured, Hagrid's reaction was filled with despair. He wept, fearing he would be sacked. His panic was not only about losing a job, it was about losing the second chance at belonging. Dumbledore, as always, defended him, but the fragility of his position was clear. Without the credentials of a graduate, Hagrid always stood on unstable ground. He remained in the shadow of the education he never finished. The irony is painful. Hagrid, more than most, embodied the values of Hogwarts: loyalty, courage, kindness, yet he was never given the diploma that signified membership. Students who passed through the castle for 7 years would grow into great witches and wizards, but Hagrid, the heart of the school, would forever be marked as incomplete. In Goblet of Fire, when Rita Skeeter exposes him as a half-giant and mocks his past, the cruelty strikes deeper because it reopens the wound of his expulsion. She attacks the very identity he had built, the fragile balance between belonging and exclusion. It is worth noting that Hagrid's connection to his broken wand symbolized his longing for learning. Though it was snapped in half, he secretly kept the pieces and embedded them in his pink umbrella. He used it to perform small bits of magic, lighting a fire, giving Dudley a pig's tail, opening doors. These small acts were more than mischief. They were his rebellion against the decision that had branded him unfit for wizardry. Every flick of that pink umbrella was a reminder of the life he might have had, the classes he might have attended, the knowledge he might have mastered. It was not only nostalgia, but a quiet act of resistance. Another moment that shows Hagrid's yearning is in Order of the Phoenix. While Harry and his friends are drowning in exams and homework, Hagrid almost envies them. Their complaints remind him of what he never got to experience fully. When he returns from his mission with the giants and confesses his injuries, his words are heavy. He is a man who has fought great battles, but still carries the ache of unfinished schooling. Unlike his half-brother Grawp, Hagrid craved books, not just strength. His dream of education was one that never faded. There is also the way he defended Hogwarts as though it were his family. In Half-Blood Prince, after Dumbledore's death, Hagrid's grief was not only for the man who had given him a second chance, but for the institution itself. He spoke of Dumbledore with reverence, as if the headmaster represented the dream of Hogwarts itself. For Hagrid, Dumbledore was the bridge between his expulsion and his continued presence at the castle. Without Dumbledore, his place was uncertain. yet he never considered leaving. He remained tied to the school like a student who never graduates, unable to let go. One can even see his longing in his interactions with Gilderoy Lockhart in Chamber of Secrets. Hagrid was openly unimpressed with Lockhart's teaching, muttering that he was a ruddy, useless git. The remark is telling. For Hagrid, teaching was sacred, a privilege he was denied, so when he saw someone treat it as self-promotion rather than genuine education, his bitterness showed. It was as if he measured every professor against the dream he once had for himself, and most fell short. Hagrid's relationships with students also revealed his unresolved feelings. He treated Harry, Ron, and Hermione not just as friends, but as companions in a journey he never finished. Every Christmas, every moment in the Great Hall, Hagrid was reliving something he had lost. When he raised his tankard of mead, when he clapped Harry on the back after Quidditch, he was, in spirit, still a Gryffindor student, older, but not graduated. His hut was not just a home, it was his dormitory at the edge of the school grounds. Perhaps the greatest testament to Hagrid's longing came during the Battle of Hogwarts. As he fought alongside the students, carrying Harry's seemingly lifeless body back to the castle, he symbolically rejoined the student body he had once been cut off from. In those moments, he was no longer an outsider, but a warrior defending his school. He stood where he had always wanted to stand, among his peers, fighting for the place he loved. It was not a graduation, but it was a final belonging. The story of Rubeus Hagrid is not only about dragons, giant spiders, or pumpkin patches. It is also the story of a boy expelled too young, a man who never let go of the dream of learning. He remained forever in the shadow of Hogwarts, working, teaching, protecting, but always yearning for the simple dignity of finishing school. His love for Hogwarts was born not only of loyalty, but of absence. He cherished the castle because it had taken something from him, yet allowed him to stay near. And though he never wore the graduation robes, never held a diploma, Hagrid was, in every way that mattered, a true Hogwarts student. Number 25. His cooking was more dangerous than a troll. Hagrid's cooking in the Harry Potter series often appeared less like food and more like a survival challenge, a trait that Rowling used deliberately to highlight his humanity. Readers easily remember his warmth, loyalty, and courage, but it was in the kitchen that his true weaknesses came to light. The image of his rock cakes, hard enough to chip a tooth, became one of the running jokes throughout the books. These culinary disasters did more than provide comic relief. They revealed that even the most generous souls could fail spectacularly in some of the most ordinary aspects of daily life. When Harry first visits Hagrid's hut in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling paints a scene that combines coziness with danger. The tea is hot and comforting, but the plate of rock cakes is so hard that Harry had to nibble them very carefully, otherwise he might break his teeth. This detail, small and humorous on the surface, underscores the contrast between the inviting hospitality of Hagrid's home and the hazardous reality of consuming anything he prepared. It was as if his warmth of heart could never quite translate into culinary skill. Hagrid's failures in cooking are not limited to one joke about cakes. They persist throughout the entire saga. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, during the tense days of the Triwizard Tournament, Hagrid again offers his rock cakes to Harry and Hermione. Rowling notes that Hermione left hers uneaten on the plate, clearly knowing from experience the dangers involved. This recurring motif reinforced that Hagrid's kitchen disasters were not a one-time accident, but an inseparable part of his character's makeup. Even his closest friends politely avoided his food when possible. The danger of his cooking even extended to his loyal boarhound, Fang, who often rejected Hagrid's attempts at homemade meals. Rowling includes hints of this subtly. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry, Ron and Hermione visit the hut, Fang whines for treats but avoids the rock cakes that litter the table. Dogs are famous for eating anything, yet even Fang seemed to know that Hagrid's food was a risk not worth taking. This detail works as silent comedy, the loyal dog recognizing peril where humans might not. Rowling's decision to repeatedly emphasize Hagrid's lack of kitchen skills was not accidental. His cooking failures humanize him. Here was a half-giant who could face werewolves, raise baby dragons, and wrestle with trolls, yet he was defeated by flour, sugar, and eggs. This made him more endearing to readers as his imperfections became a mirror of real human vulnerability. Everyone has a weakness. For Hagrid, it was not monsters, but muffins. The joke about his food being harder than stone carried symbolic weight as well. It connected Hagrid to the very earthiness of his hut, the roughness of his personality, and the rustic simplicity of his lifestyle. Unlike Mrs. Weasley, whose kitchen represented warmth, love, and nourishment, Hagrid's meals symbolized effort without success. He wanted to nurture, but he lacked the ability to transform that desire into something edible. Rowling gave readers a man whose love was genuine, but whose results could sometimes be harmful. It is worth noting that the danger of his food was not mere exaggeration. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry himself recalls trying to eat one of Hagrid's rock cakes and finding it nearly impossible. The book stressed that the cakes were not only tough, but could practically be used as weapons. Fans often joke that Hagrid could have thrown them at Death Eaters instead of serving them at tea. The comic potential of this was enormous, yet Rowling restrained herself, using it just enough to balance the more serious elements of the story. Hagrid's inability to cook also contrasted with his bravery and loyalty. For example, he was the one who brought baby Harry to Privet Drive, carried him out of the Forbidden Forest when injured, and defended him against countless threats, but give Hagrid a mixing bowl, and disaster was guaranteed. This duality made him multidimensional. Readers could trust him with their lives in dangerous situations, but would hesitate to accept a biscuit from his plate. One particularly vivid moment occurs in Chamber of Secrets. When Harry and Ron visit Hagrid during the mystery of the heir of Slytherin, the hut feels warm and welcoming, but the refreshments once again betray danger. The rock cakes are still there, still impossible to chew, still embodying the strange risk that came with Hagrid's hospitality. Rowling carefully placed these details during darker story arcs to provide levity, making sure readers never forgot the human humor that lay beneath the tension. Even Hermione, ever polite and eager to respect authority, could not bring herself to praise Hagrid's baking. When she left his cakes untouched, it was one of the rare times her kindness faltered, showing just how dire the food truly was. For Rowling, this became an instrument of storytelling. When even Hermione could not force herself to pretend, the severity of Hagrid's failure became clear. The fact that Hagrid's cooking was consistently awful also pointed to his isolation. Unlike the Weasleys, who thrived in family life and shared meals, Hagrid lived mostly alone on the edge of Hogwarts grounds. He had little practice in preparing food for others. His efforts were sincere but clumsy, reflecting the life of a man who spent more time with beasts than with cookbooks. Rock cakes, in this sense, were not just bad food, they were a metaphor for his social awkwardness and solitude. In terms of narrative function, Hagrid's culinary disasters reminded readers that kindness and skill do not always overlap. Hagrid was a man of immense compassion, willing to risk his job, reputation, and even safety to help Harry. But love alone did not translate into ability. Rowling made a point of showing that his good intentions sometimes led to disastrous outcomes, whether it was keeping a dragon in his hut or offering a snack that could break a jaw. The pattern was consistent. Hagrid always meant well, but results were unpredictable. One of the strongest examples of his food functioning as comedy relief appears in Order of the Phoenix. After returning from his dangerous mission to the Giants, Hagrid tries to maintain normalcy by hosting Harry, Ron, and Hermione for tea. The rock cakes are once again on the table, indestructible as ever, while Hagrid carries bruises and cuts from his trip. The parallel is clear. The Giants could not kill him, nor could his enemies, but his own baking remained undefeated in its power to intimidate. The juxtaposition is both humorous and symbolic. Monsters were less threatening than his pastries. The legend of Hagrid's food endures among readers because it represents the balance of strengths and weaknesses within every person. Rowling built a character who was heroic but flawed, caring but clumsy, fearless yet helpless in domestic life. The danger of his food became a running symbol of those flaws. They were rock hard, Rowling repeats more than once, as if to remind us that sometimes the smallest details carry the greatest charm. His food was more dangerous than a troll, but it was also more revealing than any of his battles. Ultimately, Hagrid's failed attempts at cooking stand alongside his love for dangerous creatures and his tendency to break rules as essential components of his identity. They make him real, relatable, and profoundly human despite his giant's blood. Readers laugh at the thought of a plate of rock cakes sitting untouched on the table, but beneath the laughter lies affection. Hagrid never stopped trying to give comfort to those he loved, even if the results were better suited for construction than consumption. Rowling's choice to highlight his culinary disasters was a stroke of genius, ensuring that behind the half-giant's towering frame and fearless loyalty, we always saw the vulnerable man who could never quite master the kitchen. Number 26. He owned a secret library on magical creatures. Hagrid's hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest was always a place of mystery. Students who came to drink his rock-hard tea or nibble his treacle fudge rarely realized that behind the clutter of cages, crossbows, and moleskin overcoats, another secret waited. In the darkest corners, under piles of blankets, or inside trunks secured with rusty locks, Hagrid had been building for years a collection few at Hogwarts even suspected. It was not the assortment of eggs or odd creatures he sometimes smuggled inside, but a library, a secret hoard of books, pamphlets, and manuscripts, many of them long forgotten and some so dangerous that even the restricted section of the Hogwarts library could hardly boast of them. The origins of this collection reached back to his days as a boy before his expulsion. Even as a half-giant struggling to fit into a world of wizards, Hagrid found himself captivated by magical beasts. Where others saw terror in a dragon's flame or disgust in a troll's stench, he felt fascination. Unable to continue formal lessons after his wand was snapped, he sought knowledge elsewhere. He haunted second-hand shops in Knockturn Alley, accepted gifts from sympathetic professors like Sylvanus Kettleburn, and traded with obscure collectors. A scrap of parchment about chimeras, a dusty bestiary about the manticores of Albania, even a battered pamphlet on the care of werewolves, all ended up in his hut, stacked precariously beside crates of flobberworms. This private archive explained why Hagrid spoke with such certainty about creatures that most wizards only whispered about. When Harry first encountered the hippogriffs in his third year, Hagrid was able to recite not only the gestures of respect needed to approach them, but also centuries of lore. The students may have assumed he was drawing only on experience, but hidden in his chest was a leather-bound volume, Creatures of Pride and Flight, an obscure text written by a wizard named Livius Catullus in 1742. Its ink had faded, but the details remained, and Hagrid had pored over every line by candlelight. "Never insult a hippogriff," the book warned, "for its heart is fiercer than the griffin and its memory longer than an eagle's." Hagrid knew these words by heart and had carried them into practice. Among the most notorious items in his secret library was a copy of the Dragon Breeder's Guide of 1807, a volume banned from the Hogwarts shelves for encouraging reckless hatching of eggs. It was from this book that Hagrid gleaned instructions when he nurtured Norbert, the Norwegian ridgeback, in Harry's first year. Hermione had once wondered aloud how Hagrid knew so quickly what kind of egg he had won in the Hog's Head. The truth was that Hagrid had memorized the colorations and patterns of shells from the illustrations of that very tome. The eggs of ridgebacks are black, and their shells resemble rock, polished by fire. One passage read, and Hagrid, with that knowledge, was certain of his prize before it even cracked. But not all of Hagrid's library was practical guidebooks. Some were ancient folios filled with myths and half-truths, legends of sea serpents and shadowy beings that dwelled beneath mountains. Hagrid relished them as much as the factual studies, for to him every tale contained a seed of truth. He kept one tattered book, bound in dragon hide itself, a collection of tales about trolls. From it he learned stories of trolls trained as guards in wizarding wars of the Middle Ages, knowledge that gave him insight when Professor Quirrell foolishly let one into the castle. Trolls are of dull wit but immense endurance, one page read, and no spell below the level of a skilled wizard can subdue them for long. Though Hagrid could not defeat the creature himself, his awareness of its habits was born from the pages he had devoured. This secret library also held forbidden works. Rumours swirled that Hagrid owned a partial manuscript of the Book of Dark Creatures, a text once confiscated by the Ministry. Such works described entities like the Lethifold, a shadow-like predator that suffocated its prey in sleep. Most wizards refused to acknowledge its existence, but Hagrid not only believed, he prepared. He copied by hand notes on its movement and feeding habits, convinced that every creature, however terrible, had its place in the balance of the world. That respect, born not of naive kindness but of hidden study, set him apart from his peers. His friends Harry, Ron, and Hermione caught glimpses of this collection without understanding its scale. Once, when Harry returned a crossbow bolt, he noticed a heap of papers spilling from under Hagrid's table, diagrams of dragons with handwritten notes. Another time, Hermione saw Hagrid quickly shut a cupboard when she asked about his knowledge of Kelpies. To Hermione, who revered books, the realization that Hagrid might own dozens of volumes unseen by Madame Pince must have been bewildering, but she never pressed, sensing that to Hagrid this library was as personal and guarded as his half-broken pink umbrella that concealed the fragments of his wand. Hagrid's dedication to study was not free of danger. Many of his volumes were enchanted, some maliciously. One notorious acquisition was the Compendium of Carnivorous Plants and Beasts, a book with jaws that tried to bite whoever opened it incorrectly. It is easy to see how such texts inspired the Monster Book of Monsters he later used in class. Students may have laughed or groaned at its biting cover, but to Hagrid such books were alive, demanding patience and respect. His method of stroking the spine to calm the book was not whimsical. It was born from years of trial with his own living tomes. The secrecy of this library also reflected Hagrid's insecurity. Expelled and branded as dangerous for a crime he never committed, he bore the weight of being seen as clumsy and uneducated. Yet in those hidden shelves lay his silent rebuttal, knowledge gathered with more determination than most fully trained wizards ever mustered. He may not have completed his newts, but his grasp of beast lore rivaled experts. Newt Scamander himself, author of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, once exchanged letters with Hagrid, though the details of their correspondence remain unrecorded. It is whispered that Hagrid possessed an annotated edition of Scamander's book, covered with his own additions in sprawling handwriting. When students scoffed at his lessons, such as when Malfoy mocked the hippogriffs, Hagrid's confidence came not only from his affection for creatures but also from scholarship. He had evidence tucked away, proofs that these animals had histories, instincts, and grandeur beyond the prejudices of wizard kind. Each time he spoke of dragons with reverence or explained the dangers of acromantulas with grave authority, the words of countless authors echoed through him. He carried not only his own experience but the voices of centuries, filtered through pages others had discarded. Some of Hagrid's books had been rescued from oblivion. During a trip to Diagon Alley, he once stumbled upon a stall where an old wizard sold weathered scrolls by the inch. Hidden among them was a map describing the migration of Nundust, immense beasts whose breath spreads disease. Wizards had feared the map, burning most copies, but Hagrid, ignoring the danger, tucked it into his pocket. That scrap became one of his proudest possessions, evidence of creatures so rare they seemed mythical. His hut, modest and smoke-filled, thus became an unlikely sanctuary for fragments of magical zoology otherwise lost. The ministry would never have approved of this hoard. Officials already eyed Hagrid with suspicion, from his love of blast-ended scroots to his half-giant heritage. Had they discovered shelves of banned manuscripts inside his hut, their judgment would have been swift. This constant risk explained his secrecy. He concealed the library not because he feared ridicule from students, but because he feared confiscation. To lose those books would be, for Hagrid, like losing the creatures themselves, a severing of the bond he had built with the wild and untamed. His collection, though secret, left traces in the history of Hogwarts. It allowed him to train Thestrals with unusual gentleness, to defend Buckbeak in front of the ministry with knowledge that astonished even Dumbledore, and to educate Harry in the simple truth that monsters were rarely monstrous once understood. Hagrid's education had been cut short, but in the glow of his fireplace, surrounded by stacks of battered books, he created his own school, one student strong, but with a library more diverse than the castle's towering shelves. In the end, Hagrid's hidden library was not just about beasts, but about identity. Every volume he saved from destruction, every pamphlet he smuggled into his hut, was a declaration that knowledge did not belong only to the privileged. He was a man denied the diploma of Hogwarts, but who proved, in secret, that learning could bloom even in exile. Each time he opened a volume, his huge fingers tracing fragile parchment, he reclaimed the education taken from him, page by page, creature by creature,